exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens.
Broadcast from later. Weak signals are simply data points that indicate significant changes could be underway. We scan for weak signals in order to sense and make sense of emerging events and issues that may have a significant impact on a system. It's a foundational phase of the foresight process. From later, we're continuously seeking out weak signals, and on broadcasts like this one, we offer a view into the process of us sharing and talking about things we don't really understand yet, but we think might be important for shaping possible futures. Everybody brought in a weak signal from the peripheries of their radar. Macy, what's your weakest signal?
So, given that I've been so contact deprived, I've been playing around in what is called a digital foreplay experience that was recently launched by the dating app Field, spelled F-E-E-L-D. So they made it in collaboration with Moniker, which is an Amsterdam-based design studio, researching the social effects of technologies. And the experience called Foreplay. So how it works is that you join an online play space, which hosts up to 4 people at a time, and everyone basically embodies this floating, reflective, morphing, orb-shaped avatar, which is essentially a distorted live feed of yourself. And so you're free to explore, move around, bump, merge, tease people, poke people, all of these soft orb souls. And it's essentially a multi-sensory experience. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's like the most titillating experience of my life, but I couldn't really stop playing with it.
Right. So it's satisfying to actually like play. It has a hashtag oddly satisfying.
Yeah, I would say it's satisfying. And I think for me, it's also just like a signal of accessible multi-sensory online experiences that makes us think about small gestures or rituals or play for human connection and intimacy. And so like, how can you flirt and like touch and like hug and squeeze people or like poke people virtually outside of any like prescribed categories? And also like, how can we think about the human body and like human flesh digitally, and like what might be the sounds of those gestures or shape or form? Yeah, I was intrigued.
Are they strangers or do you know them?
They're strangers, but you can like tell your friends or your partner to come on because it's randomly selected. So sometimes you are the only one there, and then other times there will be like one, or there might be like 3 other people.
Do you have appendages and stuff?
No.
Or are you just like literally an orb?
You're literally a orb blob.
A ball. Oh, like the original shape.
So there would be like 4 orbs.
Yeah.
Floating
there would be
around.
4 other orbs, and you can kind of just like bump into each other and would make like these mushy sounds. It's not like gross sounding, it's very like, it's calming. And there's also like atmospheric sounds and like music kind of.
I mean, Rob was hinting at this already, but it reminds me a lot of like the whole like slime trend that was like popular a few years ago.
Yeah.
And like all of the like kind of like satisfying textural signals. So we were talking about a few years ago around power washing, pimple popping, like just like the really like.
There's that Reddit thread, right?
Yeah.
Connected to flirtation or foreplay. Like, do you think it feels more like flirtation than foreplay?
Yeah, I would say it's more just playful, not necessarily like sexual foreplay. And so it's like, yeah, I would say it's like more flirtatious. And also just like really tapping into curiosity, because you're like, what does this do? What does this do?
Are there creepy orbs?
It depends, because you can kind of, it depends like whether they have their camera covered or they're actually using their feet, because you can kind of see the face a little bit, but it's totally distorted. So
Interesting.
I wouldn't say it's creepy. I would just say it's different.
One thing it reminds me of is, remember when Facebook had the function poke? Because it's like this like touch gesture thing. And at that time it was just like this button or whatever. And it was super weird, but it was like, had flirtatious vibes involved, I think, a lot of times, or just annoying vibes. It's like one of the two. But I guess when like a juvenile flirtation is annoying usually. So
the mushy sounds that you get, or different sounds that you get when you interact with somebody, how does that make you feel in your own body? Like somatically, how does it make you feel?
It makes me feel satisfied.
Actually feel the feeling? Really? Interesting.
I don't know if I'm like aroused by it.
But do you feel like the vibration of that person coming through what you hear?
In terms of like energy kind of.
Yeah. Or maybe that's the program sounds of the application, but
like I would say it sounds tactile.
Right.
If that makes sense.
You know, the tactile effects that these phones already have, like the feeling of like I wonder if people can like use that into these like virtual embodied experiences. To me, like the signal is, if I want to think about this as a signal, is like, are we going to see more kind of embodied interactions virtually, right? And like, what are the ways for that to happen?
But I mean, I just find it interesting that it's like completely touchless too, right? And it's like able to create like a tactile effect through sound or through.
It's touchless. It's on your phone, right?
Oh, I mean, that's true. It is. I was using my keyboard.
Oh, okay.
That's true.
But it's touchless. It's only like that. It's not. There's no haptic feedback.
No. So you can be using your phone, or I was on my keyboard and you're just like using the arrows to move your.
Oh, with the arrow. Okay. You haven't tried it yet with the phone.
No, I haven't tried it with that.
Interesting. That's how I imagined it. Yeah, I feel like with it like that, there's a signal here potentially to just kind of some of these things that have been around, but nobody I know's tried or talked about it. Like it's always interesting when you can like imagine different possible interfaces, especially for something like this, like with a little bit of touch.
Yeah, man, I want to go back and read some of the Ted Nelson stuff when he first started writing about what the possibilities of the internet. He's the one who coined the term teledildonics also, right? And like he had a lot of ideas of how we can transfer like touch and different types of like interactions over the internet.
Anecdotally, the best flirtation that I've had in recent pre-lockdown times was playing pinball on the same team as somebody. We couldn't figure out the 2-player mode and we're each running one of the flippers or whatever. And it was like a great first or second date type of thing. And it was like a really fun flirtation. And it was kind of, I feel like similar, like manipulating some game together. It involves like cooperation and I don't know, I immediately thought of it with this and tons of like sensory feedback that's like stimulating.
Yeah, you should play Pandemic, which is the other big cooperation.
Oh, yeah.
It's not sensory, but it's timely.
Never thought of Pandemic as a foreplay game though. Any other thoughts about what this signals and what it could influence? Is this the future of flirtation or foreplay, or is it a better way of deciding to get to how you decide to get to know someone on a dating app relative to existing?
I mean, I think their idea was for this to be like foreplay to the dating app, I guess. I mean, it's hard to get to know someone through just this experience, I guess, because there's no text communication or anything. It's all just based on like these gestures or like these movements of this orb. But I mean, it might be interesting to have something where you can like then further connect with that person. I don't know.
Signal or noise, Udit?
I think it's a signal for the same reason that I said before, that I think it's a signal of new types of virtual communication where we're trying to interact with our full bodies. This one, it feels like it's a little bit early for that, but I can imagine future ones where we see more kind of haptic interaction using, your voice, your movement, and other parts of and gestures and other parts of your body.
Valdis, signal or noise?
I don't think my thoughts are like developed enough. I think maybe I'll lean towards like the side of like a marketing fad or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
And then also put it in the lineage of just like, well, all this kind of like virtual presencing, how is it a signal if it's like been present for like decades? And that's been like the guiding vision of like since Ted Nelson. And I think Nicholas Negroponte had a teledildonics like company or something, if I'm not mistaken, like in the 70s. So in that sense, I don't know if there's anything new. I mean, the post-human shape orb stuff is kind of cool, and the textural and the sensorial. So there's something there, I think.
Is it a signal of embracing more than human flirtation? Perhaps it's just other than human.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I go that far even. Like,
I don't think so. And it does also remind me of the like perpetual weak signal in so many scans of the hug shirt, which like I've never seen one. In that sense, I could see noise, but I'm actually going to say signal overall. Asia?
Signal I think it's a signal because I feel like kind of bringing sensory means to dating apps might be, or is that like a that's like real people? You know what I mean? Like just like in like growing things, engaging with people, having communities all online, and the tactile part is like part of it. I could see that kind of being an interesting app space, but
there are a bunch of new like interactions even on just texting on Apple and stuff, like weird kind of orb like buttons and things like that they've been playing with as well. So this all might be going in some direction.
And the avatars, right? Like
Mhm.
for everything from Bitmoji to like Animoji, but also like, different ways people are representing their lovers online, like the whole like waifu subculture and like
What's a
things like
waifu
that.
subculture for the folks at home?
Oh, it's like these Japanese anime waifus, which is like the I guess it refers to the word wife, but with the Japanese accent. And it's like it's your like anime lover.
Right.
Anime companion, your companion,
Yeah,
companion.
anime. You
Okay.
you come to anime, yeah.
Nerdy joke one. All right. Valdis, what's your weakest signal?
I guess I'll call it CripTech. And it was like started from a review of a show at an art gallery, I guess in San Francisco. And it basically is I focused on one person in particular, Sadie Yi, who creates clothing for like her own particular body and her own experiences. And she is from Taiwan, but her family has a history of missing appendages. And so she only has 2 fingers and 2 toes. And like growing up, she's had multiple experiences of like people screaming when they found out, or like doctors telling her to get surgery done when she just came in to get like a medication updated or whatever, and things like that. I don't think the empathy side is like the signal part here, because I think it can veer into like pathos and pitying and just being about you and not about the other person, So what she does is like she makes clothing that's like not about covering up those differences, but about almost emphasizing them in a certain way. So she's made like a shoe that has like her 2 toes are like very prominent, and there's like a horn that's sticking out in the middle where like your feet would normally be, or the rest of your toes would normally be, She's also made like clothing out of like people's skin graft casts. So they're like very like visceral looking pieces of clothing. I've just done stuff like that. And I think the way I would frame it is that the signal isn't some like, oh, we're developing empathy for disabled people. Crip culture is like how they, reappropriated the term that was used derogatorily. But I think the thing that's interesting is like the way, not that we see people with disabilities, but the way they see us. That's like the interesting part. It's like the reversal, where what we assume is like normal in our environment, and the assumptions that go into like a piece of clothing, or like the kind of standard forms that different things take, and the expectations of like bodies to move through spaces and reveal certain parts and hide other parts, and what goes into like creating those norms. I think an awareness of that is what I see being the signal. So sort of like last week, JR had this supply chain literacy. I kind of see it in that vein. Like it's a signal of kind of like literacy around like the built environment, or the environment of just stuff around us.
So did you say graft skin, like clothing made from skin? Is that what I?
Yeah, it was like casts of skin grafts of people who I think had parts of their skin taken to be placed in other parts or whatever, and cast those into some kind of, I don't know, resin or whatever. So it looks like the skin graft that was taken itself, and then she like repeats it and makes like a dress out of it or something like that, or like a shirt or whatever.
And it's like everyday wear.
It's like a statement if it's for everyday wear, for sure. I don't think it's meant to be mass produced, because it is very personal, right? So it's very like, she's interested in the assumptions that go into making like a mass product for everyone, as opposed to like the particularities of every body,
Yeah, I like that as a reversal of like assumptions, and just and like an awareness, I guess. It's sort of like a signal of a certain type of awakening, and like lens switching and perspective enhancing.
But what do you think the stakes are in terms of increasing literacy around, this CRIP movement, if you can call it a movement? Is it to make design more inclusive? Like in this particular case, what do you think her intentions are?
Well, I feel like there's like 2 things you just asked. Like on the one hand, it's like, what are her particular intentions? And then on the other hand, like, what are the stakes of this thing, like broader speaking? And like broadly speaking, I was thinking about it earlier, and I'm like, I don't think it's about universal design or like inclusive tech, which has been like a driver of innovation in that space for like ever, like big ones are like Siri, which started as like a hearing impaired interface for computing in the 80s or 90s. but so I don't think it's necessarily about like inclusive tech as much as it is about like almost just like a critical moment. Like I'm not sure, I don't know what it leads to, you know. Like I don't know if I was reflecting too on the notion of signals, and a signal is very like, it's like a radar system is always like about a threat of something that's coming or whatever, and I was like, this isn't like necessarily that kind of a signal, you know. Like I'm actually not sure what it is, but at the same time it signals some change, you know.
There's almost a, you could call it a tangential signal here or something. It's just like about the ways things can be worn. And I mean, I always find it kind of curious and interesting that so much of clothing has just been so well established for so long, and it's just sort of done a certain way. It seems to work. Things hang on your body a certain way, but there's like other opportunities that we don't even see or think about. And I don't know. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is just like glasses, for example. It's just like this particular way it sits on your face. It stays there. It's also ability related. It's, I guess, why it comes to mind right now. It's a sort of ability enhancing or restoring technology. And I don't know, there's other ways that you can sort of like drape, hang, hook things to your body for everyday use and fashion and so on. And this kind of like tweaks the thinking, changes assumptions, changes expectations about that by personalizing it. But that's something that maybe can be applied differently to mass fashion as well. Like the jewelry that Erykah Badu wears on a regular basis, like these like face pieces and things like that, that are rare in contemporary culture, and like they look really awesome, you know. As an example, I think jewelry is one place where maybe you see a little more creativity and stuff because it is purely ornamental. But
yeah,
those words too made me think of like, in a way, just like the violence of clothing in a species level thing, you know. Like how weird is it? I sometimes think about this, like how weird would it be to see an animal wearing the skin of another animal just like walking around, you know, like a raccoon like dressed up in like a dog's like whatever outfit. It would just be like so bizarre, right? And yet it's so normal for us.
that is bizarre. The other animals must think we're crazy.
I feel like there are species who do use parts from other animals. Like I think about shellfish. I feel like there's some sort of shellfish that goes and like hides in another one and then becomes that kind of. I feel like there's maybe only one other example of an animal that does that.
It's the fur coat equivalent.
But I think with the animals, it like becomes a part of them, right? Like they are using the shell, but then it becomes an essential like part of their body almost. Whereas for us, it's just like this is a layer.
That's where you're showing off the rest of the animal kingdom.
Okay, signal or noise with it.
Is this a signal that we shouldn't be pathologizing or medicalizing body conditions or like different ways a body is? And maybe it's a signal for that. And like I'd say it's like a weak signal of something else, but I'm not quite sure what the something else is, which is like somewhere between like extending the boundary of the body into like clothing or something like that. It's interesting how all these signals so far, or like the last signal also was about the body and like the extension of the body.
Okay. Macy, signal or noise?
I don't know if it's either, but I think it's more just, I think it's around the awareness piece, and it's almost like it should be a principle.
Okay. I buy that.
Yeah.
Why that can't necessarily be considered like a signal as it's like, it would expect as far as like the trajectory of things. I guess. Okay. Asia.
I'd say it would be a signal for me, depending on where that information was published. Depending on what news outlet is like putting this out there and informing people about this is what I think a signal for that would actually be. Because a lot of news outlets that I listen to and like take in are covering disability news, or at least that's on the radar. Like Afropunk, they're always posting body positivity as like Instagram page. And so I get a lot of that, a lot of different people doing a lot of amazing things around asserting their will to live free of our judgment, you know. And I feel like that's a really important thing that I hope is not just in my bubble, you know.
So it might be a signal if the signal is about like mainstreaming this kind of awareness. That makes sense to me. Valdis, did you find this in the Wall Street Journal, or where was it?
Almost, yeah. Definitely the same readership. It was in Art in America.
Art in America. Yeah. So
both speculative financial vehicles.
Right. Very good. Okay. I generally agree on this one that the signal really depends on context and how we frame it, what we're signaling. But I'll go with signal just because of where it took my own thoughts creatively.
I was so close to winning the weakest award, the one that we talked about last week, where like nobody would say it was a signal.
I know. The weakest signal award is key. Asia, what's your weakest signal? Okay.
This is not a weak signal because it's literally happening right now, but what I'm really enjoying on Instagram right now are like Hotep narratives of self-preservation.
The Hotep narrative of self-preservation. Okay.
Yeah.
For the folks at home, what's Hotep?
Okay. Hotep originally refers to the Egyptian pharaoh Imhotep, but culturally it refers to people of color who engage deeply with like anti-capitalist and pan-Africanist ideologies. And they have like pretty big followings, like who I find most interesting just as characters altogether is Brother Polite, Chaka Bars, Killer Mike, who's also a rapper, David Banner, who is also a rapper. They've become information repositories for COVID-related anti-Black conspiracy theories, but also could probably be true, kind of, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's some fake news swirling around in it, but they're also like pointing at certain types of things that are actually really influencing what people think. One of my favorite things about them is that they're often pushing forward the ideas of Dr. Sebi, who is this awesome doctor from Honduras who died a couple of years ago, but like he, in the 1980s, he like cured cancer or something. You guys check that out. He's really, really interesting with like all natural foods and remedies. And like it all went all the way to the Supreme Court and he won the case. Anyway, so there's this whole vegan raw lifestyle that's like being promoted and talked about in these spaces. I'm really loving the conversation about immune resilience, that people, you know, boosting their own immune systems and being able to heal themselves, and like that being a forward thought of survival in all of this mess, and like, you know, giving people their own ideology about like how they can heal themselves and understanding, you know, how much it was like, it's all in your man, you know, you can see it, you know, you can see it if you believe it type of stuff. But they're becoming information repositories for COVID related, not just anti-Black or anti like lower class, not even lower class, it's like marginalized people conspiracy theories, but there's also a lot of tips for natural health and immune system, mental and physical resilience and mental health also.
Yeah, this is like an interesting epistemic hygiene kind of question of like, how do we keep our beliefs clean, especially when you have like a source where it's like, there's probably a lot of good information about a healthier way to live your life. There might be some questionable information about Bill Gates's role in creating the current COVID crisis.
Right.
How do you deal with sources like that? How do you filter when you're watching any Brother Polite or any of these? I also think among those, there's a few of like Brother Polite, Killer Mike, David Banner, all people I've seen. I feel like between like Brother Polite and Killer Mike's views are a little more epistemically hygienic. That's my take. Yeah.
But they definitely converge in like a Venn diagram of people who like are interested in hearing all sorts, like all sources of that type of information.
When they present that information, like how do they present it? Like is it like, hey, here is like truth that you need to know? Or is this like, hey, this is an opinion that, you know, you can take for what it is?
I'd say a lot of it is definitely like, open your eyes and see what's going on, you guys. Their reading of it is like the more correct one. I really do believe that there's a lot of conspiracy theory swirling around, and it affects social cohesion and trust. In so many different places in the world right now, there's like people fighting each other because of COVID, you know what I mean? But I feel like they are also media sources that are critical. They're not like CNN or Al Jazeera, or you know what I mean? They're not showing a certain type of view of the world. Like I even learned more about like how this is affecting older Black communities in the States specifically. You know what I mean? And like, I'm not sure how much of the popular mainstream media are like really looking at the racial systemic effects of COVID. I also have an idea about it a little bit because my grandma watches CNN all the time. And it's just like there's like, it's so interesting the complete difference of like light on the same type of situation. I
mean, I feel like at least in what I'm consuming, and I have a feeling all of us here, we're all pretty well aware that the health outcomes of COVID-19 are much worse for certain communities. And that's very much related to like existing issues, food deserts, like health issues that happen or whatever, healthcare. And so, yes, certainly there are like racialized communities that are way more at risk. I mean, I agree. It's not covered very well on like CNN isn't talking about it very much relative to the fact that they're like broadcasting 24 hours or whatever, but it's out there, I think, and like not super controversial. So as far as that goes, how concerned is everyone about conspiracies right now and sort of misinformation? I should say conspiracy theories.
If your question is it more than before? I would say in general, no, but like for this crisis, yes.
I think maybe people are just more susceptible to it right now because they are like looking for information that they could like have a grasp on, and or they're always just absorbing information constantly. I think in that sense there's also kind of that generational thing. Like my mom is constantly on her phone like reading everything that everyone sends her on like WhatsApp groups and stuff like that. I think there's just like a certain vulnerability within crisis itself to absorb and not necessarily be as critical with the information that's like just so readily available everywhere.
I also personally find with so many of these, nothing surprises me anymore. All the time, we're constantly doing this work of like taking in information and filtering and reorganizing and thinking about like, okay, what makes sense here? What doesn't? What's important? What isn't? And still with that, no outcome, I don't think could shock me. Like if it turns out that a well-known billionaire who used to design operating systems for computers is behind, you know, the creation of this virus. I don't think any of that's right, but like, who knows? And after Epstein, like nothing can surprise me. Like Udit, you've made this point before around like Pizzagate, where it's like, well, it wasn't exactly true, but like some version of it was kind of true.
Yeah, I've been thinking about like rules of thumb that I should have when I'm like triaging new information that comes towards me. Like one thing that I've been trying to do is like every new piece of information that comes to me, I try to ask myself, like, what kind of new information would it take for me to receive so that, you know, this piece of information becomes false? You know, how do I make this falsifiable, right? And then I go and look for that piece of information and see if it exists. And in some cases, you find that a lot of these conspiracy theories, the problem with them is the way that they're framed. They're unfalsifiable in nature, right? Like there is no way to disprove them because the way they're being talked about is that they're unfalsifiable. So, you know, nothing can exist for them to be proved false because hidden, there's a deep state that's like suppressing this information, or there is no possibility of the counterfactual ever happening. So, you know, we need to be aware of that as well. Like what is the falsifiability of like the thing that's being presented?
Yeah, you can often look at them where it's like the conspiring part might not be true, and that's like that tends to be the wildest part of the conspiracy theory, whereas like the like systemic rather than systematic oppression part is clearly true. But like it's so the idea that there's like people in a room like making this happen explicitly or whatever is the part that's kind of that actually in some way like hurts the credibility of the idea, or like distracts from actually the important issue at hand.
Yeah, in that how systemic it is. I think that the other half of that signal is that maybe the part in which Brother Polite and Killer Mike intercept in the Venn diagram is around holistic health. And how people need to take really good care of themselves and acknowledge themselves as their own healers, having agency over their immunity, giving you actionable ways or resources to how to do that. That's a thing that gives me a lot of hope too.
Why are all the major influences of culture right now hawking health products? That's everyone from Joe Rogan to Gwyneth Paltrow, and it seems like that's happening in this Hotep Instagram space as well. That's, I don't know, it's so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if are they hawking health products. They're actually, I don't know if any of the
like
influencers are making any money off of it, but they're promoting it. Yeah.
Well, actually, Shaka Bars does sell fruit internationally.
Okay.
Literally sells fruit.
Fruit?
Yeah. Fruits and roots.
Fruits and roots.
Yeah,
That's
man.
great.
Yeah, it's good. That was a product placement, actually, now I think about it.
I don't know how to deal with this in terms of signal. I'm going to say there are signals in the noise. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we're all agreeing with that. Yeah.
Consensus. So maybe the one way to think about it is that I think Hotep Twitter is a valid signal source. It's maybe like if you're reading it right, and an interesting one right now.
Yeah, man. Twitter and Instagram, both mostly for like the information and memes, and then the extent to which they feel like they're also being censored. That's a whole other issue.
All right, Udit, what's your weakest signal?
My weakest signal is about weak signals in a sense. So it's called...
guys are killing me today.
It's based on this paper called Seeing the World in a Bag of Chips, which was produced by this computer vision team at the University of Washington. And what they did was they took pictures of this bag of chips like a shiny potato bag of chips, and found that the way the light was reflecting off the surfaces contained sufficient enough information that they could reconstruct the entire room based on just the images that they had of the chips, right? So like if you have this bag of chips, there's light reflecting off. There's like shiny surfaces and like more dull surfaces. And in the ways that the shiny surfaces are reflecting the light, there is enough information, which might not be apparent to the naked eye. But if you modeled the physics from the light properly, you could in fact reconstruct the layout of the room. They managed to figure out where different people were, what the furniture in the room looked like, and so on.
So you need you need every angle of the chips, basically.
Yeah. So they did it with a few different angles of the bag. And I guess the idea is like, can we mine high quality visual information from extremely poor sources, right? And so I started seeing if there was like more around this, and I found a few different projects, including a DARPA project that we started not too long ago around the same idea. And the DARPA research program is called REVEAL, which stands for Revolutionary Enhancement of Visibility by Exploring Active Light Fields.
Very DARPA name.
Yeah, very DARPA name. And then I also found another one, which was done by a team at MIT who's been using shadows to create really detailed images of surroundings. So what they did was they took a camera and took pictures of light that was reflecting off of plant leaves in a room. And then in the kind of like variations of the way the light was reflecting off the plant leaves and like the shadows that were being created by the plant leaves, they managed to reconstruct the entire room, like a 3D model of the entire room from just the pictures of this plant. They also have another paper which is around seeing around corners, where they managed to take the shadows that were being formed at the corner of a building and managed to see the things that were happening behind the wall, so around the corner. I guess the implication for me is like, how do you, like, if you have sufficient enough low quality information sources, can you like, what are the new kinds of like high quality pieces of information that we can derive from these low quality sources, right? The internet right now is just like littered with all these like images of like, you know, houses or, and right now in particular, like all of us are like, we have this like podcast where we're recording the inside of our homes. I wonder in the future if you could mine these and like actually like reconstruct fully 3D like models of inside our homes.
Like for sure, you could see the rest of my apartment from.
Like what are
the reflection in your glasses?
That's the thing, and you're not even talking about things that are necessarily that reflective. Like,
no, I'm talking about extremely diffuse sources, right?
So on things like glasses and the glass on the picture behind me and stuff would just is like. It's almost like an example of it that we can kind of see, but you're talking about something way more.
Yeah. And there's another study that I found, which was like taking a piece of video and they created what they call a visual microphone. So they like managed to enhance the vibrations that were happening on a leaf of a houseplant and reconstructed the audio in the room that was causing those vibrations. Just purely through the video capture of that plant leaf.
Potentially hearing dialogue or conversations that happen in the room.
That was the original chip bag study that was like around a few years ago, right? It was around the crinkles of the bag, and a photo could be reconstructed into a sound of some kind. And then people were speculating like, oh, maybe from the pottery of like ancient Greece because of the way the crystals, totally speculative, but like maybe some of those sounds would be recorded in them forever, that kind of a thing.
Wow.
That's wild. Yeah, that's like very interesting in terms of just like time and memory, I guess, how memory works in a very kind of cosmic.
Yeah, and how artifacts are sampling the world in a way that we're not aware of.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Do you guys hear about the sourdough that was recreated from like millennia ago? I think it was like Egyptian sourdough that was like remade because they accurately extracted the bacterial culture and the fungal cultures from like an earthenware pot that was being used to ferment bread back in the day.
So the culture survived.
The culture survived somehow, and then they just like remade bread from like a few millennia ago.
There's a lot here in this one though.
Yeah, I mean the signal to me is just the things around us that are sampling the world, and if you have the right kind of tools, the right software, you can reconstruct and extract a lot of information from them, given the right sources. And I wonder if we'll see a lot more of that in the future. Sorry, go on.
Do you know the work of forensic architecture and like the way they try to reconstruct different like human rights violations and like international law violations and stuff like that. And it's all reconstructed from different piecemeal fragments of visual or auditory information that was taken at the scene at the time, you know? So like they triangulate like multiple cameras or whatever, and then we'll try to rebuild a 3D model of the scene based on that imagery. And it's like been held up in like international courts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, I've seen some of those techniques and like they're very labor intensive. And it's interesting because it's like, there's the question of like, how high resolution does this imagery need to be, right? And in their instance, it's like, it needs to be so accurate that like it holds up in a court of law or whatever. And that's obviously not the bar that most types of applications of that would need. But I guess maybe there's like a risk of thinking that like it will just happen. Like you could just recreate the image of a room from like a photo of a plant or whatever, but it's probably quite labor intensive, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to see the labor decrease over time as some of these techniques become automated. This one in particular was using reinforcement learning. So like there isn't this like artificial intelligence component to it. So I can see a path to it being automated. A lot of the physics simulation ones, so this one, which is like actually like literally modeling like the light rays across different surfaces, I think those are going to get better over time as GPUs become better and we can parallelize a lot of the technical reconstruction of like
I guess it's sort of, it's almost like someone at the beginning of photography being like, how are you ever going to like just snap a photo? Like you've got to like set the scene up and like
exactly
dip it in the like 18
like
different chemicals, you know. And
yeah
and like not move at all for like
yeah, that's like kind of what it is in a way. It's like a new recording media or something that could be the signal, potentially a new sort of recording technology if we include like photos as a recording technology.
I think so. I think it's possible, like a 3D recording technology, multi-sensory spatial recording technology.
Yeah.
Beyond like forensics and archaeology, which is also just a kind of forensics, or vice versa, how could you use it?
So one of the applications that the CHIPS paper was really excited about was because they use this to like model light rays in like a better way. The way they're thinking about using it is actually like very different from like the applications that I was thinking about, which were more kind of like reconstruction and surveillance and things like that. They were talking about using it to better model reflection in 3D spaces. So in like VR applications, for example, where you have like highly reflective surfaces inside VR, which right now they model really badly because they don't have a good way to model the light that's reflecting off of different surfaces because they don't actually accurately do all the ray tracing. So the application they're thinking about is just a more realistic reflection toolkit for 3D spaces. So in AR and VR applications. But that's very narrow compared to like what I think the range of applications could be. I mean, there's also a lot of like ethical implications and ethical questions about like, what is the information when I consent to putting out an image out there? What am I consenting to? Like, am I consenting to you being able to reconstruct my entire room from like this image that I've put out on the public internet?
Yeah, it's wild.
Which, you know, that could possibly be reconstructed.
And it's just like redefining like what's the meaning of public domain.
Yeah.
And that might be something that there's just like no way to stop. It's still kind of forensic in that regard too, but it's just like you can see like the future where the one doing the front, it's like TMZ is like putting out the reversal of the image based on some celebrity selfie or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
If you're worried about conspiracy theories now, what happens?
So these are all kind of interesting. For me, this is like a signal on a few levels. The way memory works, just recording and remixing and reconstruction idea, possible new technology for 3D recording. There's all these sort of like forensic applications and potential privacy invasion uses. I wonder too, though, is there something when you're talking about like using this to like see around corners and so on, is there something in this signal that challenges our perceptions of reality as we assume they are or generally understand them?
How do you mean?
We have an idea of space and 3D spaces and how they work, and based on kind of our visual perception, our eyes. And some of that seems like it's kind of challenged here. Like it almost seems impossible intuitively that you would be able to use something to like see around corners and
Yeah.
look that way. Yeah.
I mean, so to me, the idea is that there's a lot more visual information in the light that we're seeing through our eye that we're not cognizant of. And given the right modeling and simulation technologies, you could, in fact, extract that information out of informationally low dense sources.
So there's like the potential of completely extending like our field of vision or like our perception, our perceptual limits.
Yeah. So, I mean, normally the way people think about that is that we can only see like a very narrow spectrum of like electromagnetism, right? Which is like the optical range. And like, obviously we cannot see X-rays, we can't see terahertz rays, we can't see infrared rays. But this is like a really different thing to me because it's like, they're taking like the narrow spectrum that we are actually sensitive to and extracting more information from that, which we are not cognizant of.
I wonder if you could use it as a watermark for AI manipulated imagery or something like that, you know, like all the light rays in your back thing have to be calibrated correctly to count as an authentic image, you know, something like that.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, like a better way to understand what is fake images versus what's real, because like the way the light is like diffuse and refracting and reflecting off different surfaces needs to be like accurate. It reminds me of like the moon landing conspiracy theory, where the reason why people thought it was fake was because the way the flag shadows were in that image were not, which a lot of people thought they weren't like accurate, representative of reality.
I bet they're shaking in their feet right now, the moon people.
So what do you guys think? Weak signal, strong signal, medium signal, signals in the signal?
I was thinking, to what extent can different light or different sensory abilities reconstruct spaces for people who can't see, or like how might that then feed into haptics or
translate.
Translate, you know what I mean? Like when I'm thinking about that, I feel like it, like that's an opening to another sense. And then it got me thinking about ghosts. So I feel like maybe in that, like, you know, beyond what we can't sense, like what's out there.
Honestly, I was thinking something similar, like the notion of residual energy, not in a physics sense, I don't think, but in another sort of common usage of it. When people talk about like, oh, this residual energy, I can feel it in this room, or like something like that. It almost seems in a way of like, there can be, in some of these instances you talked about, evidence of such a thing, of like, oh yeah, they actually, so it's like, it not only kind of messes with our understanding of space, but also of time in a certain way. There's like things, some of these things that you could say, no, that's nonsense, that's the past that happened, it's gone. It's still sort of, residing here in very real ways.
Yeah, you're always leaving behind trace signatures of your actions.
There's always an impression, recording. Yeah. It's evidence of karma too, then maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
That part.
What year do you think it'll be first like shown on Ghost Hunters? Like,
what will be?
Ghost Hunters.
That technology, they'll come in. Yeah.
Okay, Macy, signal or noise?
Signal.
Yeah.
On all fronts.
Yeah. Valdis, signal, noise.
Oh, just to be contrarian, I'll just say noise. But I think it is a signal. But if I were to make a case like against it, it's not necessarily that different from like taking a photo in the first place, or it's just a continuation of that process of like what we thought previously was bits of information that would never be, you know, inscribed on anything and just gone forever, or actually preserved somewhere, you know. It just turns out that now the pieces that we thought with a photo you had to consciously capture it, whereas with this it's like unconsciously captured, but it's like just this unfolding of the same process, you know.
Is it just like the progress of technology
of that particular strand or branch, or however you want to think about technology? But otherwise I would definitely say it's a signal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I get what you're saying though. Like it's just no weirder than other archaeological sensing technologies or something like that, like carbon dating or something.
Back to that bread.
The Egyptian bread.
Yeah, the
exactly.
Egyptian bread.
But I think too, as like a signal, but I don't think it's a signal yet, but I like this idea of like the commercialization of forensic technologies too, that I think could be interesting. What happens when some of these techniques like leak out into the mainstream, you know, and what kinds of use applications they have, you know?
Yeah, I'm really afraid of vigilante forensics.
Vigilante forensics, but so interesting. Another signal here, I think, is the use of the word forensics, and I think beginning with forensic architecture, and that has become something else where I saw Sparks and Honey that recently that talked about like cultural forensics as trend scanning or whatever, it's cultural forensics. But like that word seems to be getting used now as like a new kind of like I don't know. It's like it used to be something like reserved for criminology or something, but it's been kind of reappropriated in multiple ways.
Think of when you say cultural forensics is like this like mass cultural like movement of trying to determine who killed Jeffrey Epstein,
Yeah,
which is also a form of cultural forensics.
the mass piecing together of conspiracy theories too.
Yeah.
Don't they call that a string board or something?
Like as though the board that you'd see in the detectives
Yeah.
office. Yeah.
It's like a term people use now. Like, oh, that's just a crazy string board or something like that.
Can we change our job titles from foresight strategists to cultural detectives?
String borders.
Forensic foresighters.
Future detectives? Awful, all of it. Asia, signal or noise?
Signal.
I agree, signal. That's cool. That's a good one, Udit. All right, broadcast from later.